Hello and welcome to Unparliamentary Language, a podcast that is trying to see the future. And how are you, Rob?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm pretty well. It's not so long since we last spoke. I appreciate we're releasing these episodes a few days apart. But for us, it has been mere moments since the last recording. I think we all know what this is. This is our predictions for 2021. And we're going to be basically following the same list of things we had in our previous set of predictions, except with one obvious addition with what we think about coronavirus. So let's press on straight into that, really, I think. Do you have any predictions about how coronavirus is going to sort itself out in 2021?
Well, first of all, I'll preface this by saying I'm not a virologist. I'm not an expert on viruses and how they will peter out, etc. I believe the main wisdom is that we can start seeing a possible upturn in our fortunes with the rollout of the vaccine or the various vaccines that are around. But of course, that's a huge logistical challenge for not us, but countries, not just us, but countries all over the world. So I think that we won't see our lives start to go back to any kind of normality until Easter time. April's the figure that's been quoted a lot. And one reason we're seeing that a lot in the UK media is that the furlough scheme, or essentially government support for those jobs that are most affected, has been extended to April. So that at least gives you some idea of how our government is seeing it. They're certainly not seeing any return to those normality until April time. Looking longer term than that, as for the whole of 2021, I don't think we'll see a massive. I don't think we'll suddenly see full football stadiums or have a completely normal experience until the very end of 2021, even if into 2022, because just the scale of the vaccination program, the amount of things you've got to do to get everything back up and running again. Fingers crossed, I don't see us having. I think that the next lockdown that we have, or the lockdown we're going through, is, fingers crossed, the last major lockdown we have to do, because by then, I would hope that we've got the vaccine out to enough people that you start to get any effective form of, resistance in the general population. But I still think we'll go ahead. I think mask wearing will still be a thing in shops. I think social distancing is still here to stay for a lot of us until vaccines are really rolled out. So, it's weird. It's weird that we've got this new section of the podcast, obviously one that was a part of the predictions, one that we didn't have when we had in 2019.
No, as I said in our last episode, we were chatting face to face in your house this time last year, without a care in the world for how weird that would be a year later. So yeah, it's very strange.
I think the one thing that might change, I might go to a wedding this year. Or at least I hope I do in 2021. I would like to attend at least one wedding.
Yeah, I mean, I hope that's possible as well. I know one of our friends had a wedding this year that went ahead, but it was obviously down to the very reduced numbers of 15, so none of us actually attended. It was just, bride, groom, close family, very close family, and like best man and bridesmaids, So obviously hoping that we will get an opportunity to have a party with them when everything's back to normal. But yeah, about 4 weddings got put off this year I was supposed to be going to, so I suspect 1 or 2 of those might happen, but I also understand if you've already had to shift your plans, you might just wait. I mean, I don't want to go on this tangent, but to me, the point of, if you're having a wedding, right, is to be able to see all your friends if you can. Obviously, they're expensive things. So I suppose maybe there is an argument for having a small wedding with your family and then have the shindig with your mates a bit away from all of that stress. But I think most of my friends were planning to have big events that we were both invited to. So I think that would be nice, wouldn't it? I just want to add on. So I think I feel you're broadly right in your predictions there. But obviously, time will tell. Again, I'm not a virologist. One thing about having done a PhD is I'm very aware of the things I'm not an expert in, and this is definitely one of them. But I am fortunate to get access to lectures from people who know a lot more about this topic than I throughout the year, which has been really interesting. Actually, one of the perks of my current job. So I think I would say, so the vaccine, we have a vaccine, we have multiple vaccines. We also have a few more in the pipeline, which seem to be even easier to distribute. but it's still a massive undertaking. Different governments worldwide have ordered different amounts of different vaccines, so it's going to differ from place to place. In the UK, at least, I think we can expect, because it sounds like the Pfizer-Moderna one, it sounds like there's slightly less doses, I think, than we were hoping to have produced by this point. And similarly, I think the AstraZeneca one is just taking a bit longer to get off the ground. So I think it's, be cautious. We're going to have this lockdown. We're going to still be wearing masks and everything. So I know some people are saying, by April, maybe we'll be starting to see things come through. I definitely think it's going to be later than that. I think, especially for people our age, in our 30s, it's going to be definitely around, summertime, if not later, that we start to see it, unless you happen to be a frontline worker. I spoke to my grandma over Christmas, and her neighbours downstairs, who are similar age to her, 80s to 90s, one of them has a heart condition and has had his vaccine, but my grandma in her 90s has yet to have hers. So it's definitely a thing that's being rolled out slowly. Just because some people have had the vaccine doesn't mean everyone's had it yet. So I think we're going to have to be cautious. I very much hope things end up being much quicker than I think it's going to be, but I think your idea that things won't really be returning to normal until end of 2021, maybe 2022 is definitely true, especially for the big things, like you say, concerts, live shows, those kind of things. I think are very much going to still be in this kind of weird quasi state where they're either like half virtual or half in person. You kind of have comedy gigs and stuff trying to do that. It's obviously going to be really hard for the arts, given that the government has not really been supporting them that much. And I think the other thing is, don't plan a summer holiday yet. I don't know if you saw during the Black Friday sales that like BA and other companies were offering like cheap tickets, like book them in advance. I think they had a very generous cancellation policy, but I'm not going to be booking any flights anytime soon, personally.
I've seen some mad adverts. I've seen one for Ryanair that said, "The vaccine is here, book a holiday now." And it's like, whoa, hold your horses there, Ryanair. Like, we got some other stuff to sort out before I go booking a flight on one of your not so top quality airlines. I don't wish to slander Ryanair in any way, but they are one of the more budget choices. You have lots of options for your flight.
But they're very much the kind of one where they'd like upsell you, 2 meters space from your nearest passengers and stuff.
yeah.
I think probably, I think maybe if you're lucky come summer, it will be a bit like this summer, where it definitely seems like the virus is not as bad in summer. Like, we definitely got that impression. Like, if you look at the difference between now, where people have been like mixing indoors more compared to when people were mixing outside, I know there's a new variant as well, and I think that could potentially throw a spanner in the works for all of our predictions here.
Yeah, I guess the new variant is the thing, isn't it? That's the wild card that we're not sure of. We know what life is like with the coronavirus that operated by the rules that we were aware of. This new variant, does make things a bit different. But.
And I think, take a massive pinch of salt here, but the understanding right now of the new variant is it spreads a lot faster, but it is possibly less lethal, and the vaccine should also protect against it, because it's a similar, the spike protein is similar. But again, I'm not an expert on this. That's just my understanding of the situation right now. So hopefully the new variant will have less of a problem, and there is this tendency for viruses to get less lethal over time. And so, it may eventually become more like a common cold, but obviously could be, flu-like and really bad for older people still. So there's still that need to get everyone who's older vaccinated, and then eventually everyone who's younger vaccinated to stop the spread, just like we do with flu and other things, even if the lethality comes down over time. But right now, it's dangerous. Don't go outside. Don't be an idiot. Wear your mask. I think one thing I'm going to add in, which I don't think is it's not a prediction, it's more a hope. I know that after the SARS epidemic in Asia, which happened when we were quite young, that led to people in Asia wearing masks out of course. Sorry, that's not the right phrase. Wearing masks whenever they had some, a cold, any kind of sniffle, just to protect others. And I very much hope that's a thing that just becomes normalized. If it normalizes mask wearing when you're ill, because, it can stop you giving colds and stuff to other people, which would be great. You don't want anyone coughing on you on the tube normally. Right now, obviously, it's terrible, but it was still a bit awful before. So it'd be nice, I think, if that happened.
Yeah, exactly. I'd agree there. I would have laughed at the idea of ever wearing a mask, and I think I remember laughing at passers-by when this whole thing started. It was like, what, they're wearing a mask? They're really taking it that seriously? But now it's like, oh no, this is really actually sensible, and it's kind of like, if I've got a cold, it stops me spreading it from you anyway, so why wouldn't I wear one? It's just a piece of fabric. It's such an easy thing to do. That's,
and in winter, when colds and flus are spread more easily, it keeps your face nice and warm as well. So that's an added bonus. But yeah. Hopefully, we're wrong in that things get sorted out quicker than we expect. But yeah, don't plan any holidays yet. You might be lucky and have an outdoor in the UK kind of holiday. If that's the kind of thing I'm thinking might happen in summer, that things are a bit more open like they were before, and you can like book a cottage on your own or book a campsite, socially distanced from people and go hiking or something. But I don't think it's going to be. I don't imagine people will be jetting off anywhere in summer without very good reason to. So moving on from that, our next topic was the Brexit process. So we are recording this just before everything goes into place, but it looks like at the moment we have a deal. It's been ratified by the EU. I assume MPs are voting on this like imminently. I haven't actually seen a story about that.
So they will be voting on it. Some stories are starting to come out about how the various parties are going to vote. I think the general consensus is that the Conservatives will, on the whole, support it. You may get some very Brexity people who feel that the deal doesn't split us up enough from the EU that vote against it, and they're able to do that because, of course, Labour are on side and are going to support the deal, or at least that's how Keir Starmer is going to whip them. However, there are at the moment a number of Labour MPs saying they might abstain because they think it's ultimately a bad deal. But Labour's again in this tricky position where they're damned if they do and they're damned if they don't. So if they don't support the bill and the Conservatives pass it anyway because they've got the majority, then the Conservatives can forever say, you didn't support this Brexit deal, you're not very patriotic, you don't like this country, blah, 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 blah. However, if they do vote for the deal, then there might be alienating Labour supporters who never wanted to leave the EU in the first place and actually think that if this deal ends up being bad for the UK in any way, then Labour will always have that stigma of, oh, they voted for this bad deal. And that means that they're less likely to differentiate themselves from the Conservatives if it comes up in a future general election, because the Conservatives can throw that back in their face and say, well, you voted for this deal as well, so don't have a go at us for it. So, that's the general way it's going to go. I think there's zero chance of this bill not passing through the House of Commons. It will go through. We will get the deal we negotiated with the EU. I think the really interesting thing will be to see how the general public and then how business take it, because I would say that we haven't spoken since the deal went through on Christmas Eve, but those headlines that were coming out on Christmas Eve were very triumphant, I think, for, oh, Boris has done it again. He was saying no deal for so long and he's pulled something out of the fire and it's absolutely fantastic for the EU. And there were lots of, unsurprisingly, the pro-Brexit papers were very happy Johnson had secured a deal and were singing his praises. The reality is definitely going to hit on January 1st. When we left on January the 31st, even though the Conservatives said that's when we officially left the EU, because nothing really changed for business, we haven't really seen the impact. However, there are a lot of stories coming out already in the papers that there's a bit more red tape now than we thought. And because a deal only was discovered only came to on December 24th, that means businesses have only really got a week to scramble. If you were very unprepared, you've only got a week to scramble and ready for when those deals change on January the 1st. And that's when we'll start to see the real impact. And I think the public won't see much of a difference at first. Businesses will. And then as businesses start to struggle maybe more with the changes, that leads to prices going up or customers unable to get things that were able to get easily before, that will start creeping into the general consciousness. And that's when we might see the tide turn a little bit against, why did we bother doing this again? This is making my life considerably more difficult than it was previously. But then again, that might just get lost in the COVID news jumble, because obviously for the government, there is another big story dominating the headlines. If Brexit deals or Brexit supply lines were to affect COVID and the delivery of a vaccine, I think that would have a big impact on how Brexit is viewed by the general public. if our recovery was delayed because of Brexit supply lines, I think that would definitely be seen as an overall negative of the deal we're able to negotiate with the EU.
I mean, I think I want to add that, having a deal we always said was better than having a no deal. I think that still holds. But, I've seen a lot of articles going around in the last week or so. For example, some people's presents got caught up in customs, might not get through to the 1st of January, so they're going to be hit with higher charges because if you were buying something from the EU thinking, oh, it's not going to have any customs charges, well, if it's over £390 in value, which again is quite a fancy Christmas present by most people's standards, but, maybe your parents bought you a laptop and you're a student at uni and, you could hit that kind of cost relatively easily, I suppose. It's not your average purchase, but it's definitely a thing around Christmas time people could hit. Then there will be additional customs charges. Obviously, the other thing is people are heralding it as the end of the booze cruise because you won't be able to go and buy as much alcohol as you like and bring it back. But in reality, I think the current limit is 42 litres of beer. And I think the only thing actually is spirits over 20% is quite reduced, but it's still per person. So like if you have 4 people in a car, like you can't fit as much alcohol in your car as you can purchase still. Like it's very much as it, don't get me wrong. I think it would be better if we were with the old rules, staying in the EU. And I've always thought that, but I think there's a lot of stories going around at the moment about, and it will shake out how bad these things are. And I think actually the thing most people will actually start to notice is increase in food prices, things like that, because import fees will go up on all of those things, and that will then get passed on to customers. So I think that's the thing you'll notice. Like food prices in the UK are already more expensive than certain other countries in Europe. Germany's a prime example where they do a lot of their own production and food is really cheap by comparison. So I think that's where people will start to notice. And again, like with all these things where prices go up, the hardest hit people are the poorest again, because, people with very good jobs couldn't see a small increase in their food bill each month and be like, oh, well, I'm not going to, have that one fancy evening out or whatever. But people who are, on minimum wage, etc., will be affected more. As for predictions, I think I'm probably going to agree with you in the whole again. But yeah, I think there'll definitely be more and more of these news stories, and it may get buried at various times by COVID stories, but there will be more and more stories about the negatives coming out from all the newspapers. I've seen things like the Daily Mail, etc., like, talking about how, this unforeseen negative. And I think we talked about that last time. And it's like, well, it was very much foreseen. And we told you so 6 years ago, however long ago it was when we were having these discussions about Brexit. So I think there's going to be an uptick in those stories. I think obviously the papers that are pro-Brexit are still going to spin it as the EU screwing us over with this deal. But it's a deal we agreed to. And I think it's going to be holding the current government to account for all of these things, and reminding people as we go on. Because if there's a hope of getting out of kind of this silliness in the future, I don't mean reversing Brexit or anything. Brexit has happened right now, and I don't think there'd be the desire to go back into the EU. Like I don't think there'd be enough people wanting to go back into the EU, nor would the EU want us back in like the next 5-10 years. I think that's a long pipe dream away at the moment. But I definitely think there will be an opportunity to, hold our current government to account over this if people are loud enough. And then obviously when the next general election comes around, which I appreciate is 4 years away still, they very much need to hold their feet to the fire over how things have gone wrong from this, is my opinion of it anyway.
That's a very good point. The one point that I've missed, and maybe this is a prediction for 2025 or whatever, but the government has finally... It's out of the EU, but it's lost one of its biggest scapegoats in the fact that when things went wrong, it was very easy to say, oh, that was an EU directive, or, oh, if only we were free to do what we wanted and weren't held back by the EU, we could do this. Now the government doesn't have that excuse anymore. Officially, they can't. It's all on them. So to see how the government copes with that new responsibility and what they do with it will be very interesting, and we'll see how... I think they're likely to get a bit of a honeymoon period this year, but as the years go on, and like you say, as the general election approaches, it'll be really interesting to see who they blame instead of the EU for their faults, essentially, because governments have been doing it for 30-odd years, blaming the EU when actually they've had very little to do with it.
So moving on from the Brexit process, and I suppose still kind of relevant, we're touching on Boris Johnson and the Conservatives. So we think they're going to have a bit of a harder time of it as people start to realise stuff related to Brexit. What do you think about Boris Johnson? first up, I suppose. Do you think he can navigate his way through this? He seems to keep surviving through scandals that would have got rid of lesser governments, as people say, but it very much seems like he's constantly going from one problem to another.
Yeah, so I don't think I'm unfair when I say Boris Johnson has had a very tough first year as Prime Minister. A lot of people are saying that, he should be lauded as a hero for what he's been able to do with Brexit, because when you took the government that he was he took charge of before that general election in 2019, it was one that was rapidly turning into a minority one. He couldn't command the respect of his own MPs. And then he came out of a general election with an 80-seat majority and a Brexit deal. So on that front, you could say that he seems to have got what he wanted, although the general, like I said before with the whole Brexit thing, it's a very long deal. It's 1,000 pages long. The devil is in the detail. It might turn out that some of the things he's agreed to, some of his backbenchers are very annoyed about. So we'll see how he's able to maintain party unity this year. That's something he's generally been bad on outside of Brexit. And although I think that he will survive 2021 as leader of the Conservative Party, he really can't afford many more gaffes or the whiff of incompetence that has come around this government in this year. I know I've been very critical of the Conservatives this year, and generally my predisposition is to be fairly critical towards the Conservatives because of my political leanings. But it is no word of a lie when I say that this is unfortunately one of the most incompetent governments that I've had in my living memory, which means I've been astounded at what they've been able to get wrong in a major crisis and how consistently they've been able to do it. And they really need to stop doing that. Like you say, if we're getting into tier 4, tier 5, and coronavirus is a big thing, they need to stop that, and they need to stop the U-turns, and they need to get their act together. Because if they don't, there were already rumblings in the Conservative Party that Boris wouldn't last until the next election. I think it's almost guaranteed he won't if he has a repeat of 2020 in 2021. So that's my quite bold prediction for the Conservative Party, but I think Boris will survive the year because he has to, because he's the Prime Minister and he'll probably be the Prime Minister. We need consistency at the head of government to get us through this crisis and through the virus. But after that's all over, I think the Conservatives will reconsider their position. I think Boris Johnson has certainly lost the popularity that he had in 2019, where that sort of lovable buffoonery was fine back then when we had less important things to worry about. But it certainly seemed to be less good for us once we've actually had to deal with some very serious matters. So the Conservative Party needs a better year. They may go up in the opinion polls if the coronavirus rollout and the vaccine all goes swimmingly and very well. So there's huge potential for them to reap in a great, amount of good public feeling if they manage this well. If they mishandle it, though, and we see, if we're able to compare ourselves to other countries in Europe, for example, and the whole of Europe has the vaccine rolled out and is living in relative freedom, whereas we're stuck in tier 4 or tier 5 because we're lagging behind and our vaccine rolling program hasn't gone as well, that's when I think we'll start to really see a dip in the opinion polls for Boris Johnson, because you can't block out the rest of the world when it comes to that. And I think that'll be a big barometer of Boris Johnson's success this year.
It's definitely fair to say he's had a hard time of it. Admittedly, some of it was of the Conservatives' own making and of Boris's own making, especially with Brexit. Coronavirus, no one could have predicted. I say no one. Lots of scientists predicted something like coronavirus would happen in the next X years, but not necessarily in 2020, in the middle of us having to deal with Brexit. So yeah, I think there's a little bit of slack allowed, but I do think the general mood, even people who were quite critical of the Conservatives when he got infected back in April and was in hospital and, he had to do all that stuff, everyone kind of understood it was the country pulling itself together in all of this. And I think that rhetoric did him well for a short period of time. If you look back on it now, in December of this year, it kind of seems absolutely wild to me that we could have, felt that way. Like, obviously no one wanted him to die of coronavirus. That would have been awful. But, the idea that they were kind of like handling it in a kind of sensible way, especially as stuff about, has come out about, stuff, all of these contracts going to their mates and stuff, and it's very much exactly what you'd expect from a Conservative government if you've followed them before, except maybe a bit more brazen than previous ones. Although, again, I wasn't around during Thatcher's era, so I can't speak to it personally, but I do remember being told by friends about what it was like. So, I can see that there is that kind of thing did happen. And not that any government has been particularly great with those kind of things. There's always been, jobs for mates kind of stuff going on. But this seems very brazen and out there. So I very much hope he's held to account over this. But whether I can make a specific prediction, I think he's going to continue to go ahead as he has. I think he's going to continue to be a bit of a buffoon, bungle things, have U-turns probably. Will getting rid of Cummings change things? I think it's going to change the overall tactics of the government maybe, but I don't know if that's necessarily for the better or for the worse at this point. I think Boris is one big thing away from tumbling, but I don't know what that big thing is. So I can't say with certain that Boris will disappear this year, but I could see that he might be like, I've got Brexit done now. I could see there being an argument for, I've got Brexit done by his terms. I want to get out of this now. He also, it's the famous quote from Doctor Who. She looks tired, doesn't she? It's obvious that being infected with coronavirus has had an effect on him. He has looked a lot more tired this year. I mean, I know he has a small child as well. So there's a lot of reasons why he might want to step down from a personal perspective as well. But I do think he'll need to be pushed rather than choosing to do it, for his own sanity. Yeah. So I'm not saying he's going this year. I think it would be too hard to predict that. But I think if something big enough comes along to knock him, some big scandal to do with coronavirus, say they bungle something to do with the vaccine delivery or something like that, then that could be enough to tip him over. Or maybe there's some other thing to do with Brexit that will eventually hound him out. But also, I don't think anyone necessarily wants the job. So there's a reason the Conservatives would keep him in unless he steps down. So it's kind of, there's that hard tension where I don't think he's the kind of person who would choose to stand down unless he was pushed. But I don't know if anyone would push him, because then they'd have to take up the current mess. So, yeah. Is there anything else you want to talk about with the Conservatives? Obviously, coronavirus is big and in the news, but we talked about their manifesto promises and stuff last time. Do you want to maybe make a prediction about the budget, given it's been delayed to March?
I think when it comes out, they will try and focus on the levelling up agenda, because that's the word that keeps being repeated over again. They will want to strengthen their support in that northern powerhouse that they won in 2019. I think it's probably was one of their goals for 2020, but that's all been put on hold. So expect that agenda to continue. With Cummings out, I feel that Boris will, aside from the Brexit and the coronavirus things, try to be a bit more cuddly and nice, because ultimately Boris Johnson likes being liked. He likes being popular. That's how he got into this position, because he was willing to say anything to anyone, essentially, so he could get support. Yeah, I feel that he will try and be nicer. He will try and be less culture warsy when it comes to issues that aren't about Brexit, or at least he will attempt to. But a lot of that is, again, dependent on the goodwill of the British people. And it's possible that even, by the end of him dealing with coronavirus, if that goes poorly, the goodwill of the British people may have run out for Johnson. And that's where we'll see a real challenge for him, to see if he can head that up, and if he's up to the task, or if he decides that it's not for him and somebody else will have to take the reins.
I think I'm fairly safe in predicting that this budget will see some way of making up the money that has been spent on coronavirus. I don't know if it would necessarily be an increase in income tax. So the Conservatives have been cutting away at income tax over the last how many years. So they've raised that base level for income tax. Obviously, the easiest thing to do would be just to tax people who are earning 50k or more, slightly more. But that's very much the kind of thing the Conservatives don't like to do. So I would not be surprised if... Actually, no. What my prediction is going to be is that there is some kind of tax or way of generating more revenue that will be used to help try and pay off the debt that's come from coronavirus. I don't think it's going to be full-on austerity, because they know that looks bad. But, I think they wouldn't want to do an income tax. But when you think about the other things that they traditionally raise the tax on to generate revenue, we're talking alcohol. Well, it can't be in pubs because they're not open. It would be on petrol, via fuel duty. But again, hard to do when no one's driving anywhere. I think the correct thing to do is to tax people earning, who are already super taxed and above. But I have always thought that, regardless of which government was in charge. I think that's how you fix a lot of these things, especially people, the amount of money you can get off the super rich by just slightly increasing their tax is quite substantial. I do wonder if they're going to have to increase income tax over the board, but I'm not predicting that per se, because I think that is definitely something the Conservatives would consider looking bad. And I think it would take a lot for a Conservative finance minister to do that. So I think there will be something. I'm just not clear on what it would be, but it definitely seems to me like the thing that people should be prepared for is something on income tax. If not, it's going to be small taxes across the board that try and make up stuff. And then, of course, as we exit lockdown and our various tier systems, and as that starts to happen, they could throw in a tax on fuel, for example, now, knowing that they're going to get that money back in the future. Maybe that's how they would do it. But obviously, in the short term, it's not going to be generating much revenue for the government. But there's got to be something, because we are going to need to pay off that debt. And as I think we discussed, then don't like using austerity as an argument anymore. And specifically right now, when people are out of jobs, they can't be seen to be targeting the poor and vulnerable. I know that's generally what they do, but I just don't think there's any way that could fly. And if that's the kind of thing where I could see that toppling Boris Johnson, if that's what Rishi came out with. But I don't think that's what they do. I think they must know how bad that would look. So yeah, there will be some kind of increase in tax or whatever to cover the cost of coronavirus so far. I suppose that's it. That's all I can say on that. It's too hard to predict exactly what, as far as I'm concerned. So moving on from Boris Johnson and the Conservatives, a topic we can probably talk a bit more about now, because we now know who the Labour leader is, as we discussed in our review of last year. So Labour, what are they going to do this year? We've got Keir Starmer. We've got used to him at Prime Minister's Questions. What is he going to try and achieve this year? How is he going to be seen? How's he going to improve his profile, stand up to the government? What kind of things is he going to make a point on? Because it does seem like he's had to go along with a lot of the stuff the government has done early on in the pandemic, and also some of the Brexit stuff.
Yeah, so I think we will see a continuation of going along with stuff, particularly with COVID and the vaccinations. I think everybody will be behind that, and there'll be national unity on that aspect of it. So I fully expect him to get behind that, unless there is, of course, another scandal or vaccines not getting to care homes, etc., etc. I think that he's much more confident now on calling the government out where there are perceived failings, particularly with things like PPE or vulnerable groups not getting the help they deserve. So he'll continue to hold the government to account on those matters, but when it comes to the rollout of the vaccination, I assume that he'll be fully on board and behind that all the way. On Brexit, the question is more interesting, because Keir Starmer's tactic on Brexit so far has to be just ignore it. He's not in charge of the negotiations, never was part of that team, so there's not much that he can say to change proceedings. He seemed almost allergic to it whenever it's been brought up. It's been something that Boris Johnson has jibed at Keir Starmer about, saying, give me opinion on this, and Keir Starmer refuses to say anything on it, really. He's going to be forced to have an opinion on it now with the deal going through. The question now is, does he double down and support the deal and maybe win back those voters in the north who traditionally voted Labour but voted Conservative in 19 because they wanted to get Brexit done, as the big motto was? Or does he say, no, I don't think this is a good deal for the country. I don't want my name against something that's going to hurt us economically. I might want to really have a go at the government for what they agreed in this deal, and maybe suggest that if I was in charge, I would have negotiated a much fairer, much better deal for the UK. I think that second argument is far harder for him to convey to the British public. I don't know which supporters it wins for him, particularly up in the north. That argument is very hypothetical. I could say, I would have done a better deal with the government, but guess what? I don't have to prove it, and I'll never have to do that deal. So it's like a meaningless argument in that sense. So I don't know what political capital Keir would actually gain from doing that. But inevitably, it will cause some disruption in his party. And it's a party that's kind of failed to unite under him as much as he would hope. In 2020, of course, we had the anti-Semitism report come out, and that led to Jeremy Corbyn releasing a statement of his own, which led to his expulsion from the party. Now he's going to be brought back in, but that certainly showed a big tension at the heart of Labour, that there's still that split between Corbynites on the left and Keir and the more central bits of the party. We have to remember that this is a party that lost by 80 seats in 2019 and haven't looked like forming a majority government since the days of Tony Blair. So they've got a long way to come back if they want to challenge the Conservatives anyway. And for all the Conservatives' perceived incompetence and their mishandling of crises, the opinion polls still remain remarkably even despite that. So I think Keir does have a massive challenge in 2021. I think he will continue in the same vein, being very good at PMQs, picking Boris Johnson up on the detail. His big challenge going forward is he actually needs some policies that aren't just, I don't like the way Boris Johnson does things. It's always very hard to do that, particularly when it's not an election year. The nature of opposition is that you can't really produce your arguments until there is an election and you have to concretely say, no, this is what I would do when I was in charge. But Keir still needs to unite that party, I think, if they have any chance of winning in the future.
There's not really a lot of polls available at the moment. So that the one thing you can see is that Boris's disapproval rating is worse than his approval rating. He's kind of in that Trumpian kind of level where he has a disapproval rating of 54% and approval of 46%. I haven't found a good poll on like Keir versus Boris, but YouGov does have a poll where if you take well and don't know, because if you assume in the run up to an election you could flip don't know into they have a good enough opinion of him to vote for him, you get 66% of people who've been polled by YouGov. But yeah, I think I don't know enough yet. I feel like he's going to continue to smash PMQs. Like he's literally doing the thing that he needs to do against Boris, which is turn up with a list of things Boris has done wrong and just say them. And like that manages to keep Boris's inadequacies in the news. That's obviously good for Labour in general, but it's obviously so long from we're so far away from the next general election that I don't know how much this year in all is going to matter. The thing I'd like to see is obviously the current government being called out more for the problems that they've had. I think Keir Starmer will probably have to do that a bit more, and he'll find it easier, especially as the vaccine comes in, as coronavirus goes away. Like there's a certain level, as we discussed, of having to all be in this together to deal with coronavirus. And I think as that starts to become less of a problem, then he will be able to criticise more. So I think there will be more criticism of the government. Other predictions about him and Labour are a bit hard. Like, we're so far away from an election that I think it kind of almost doesn't matter. I do think we'll still have Keir Starmer as leader of Labour at the end of next year. I think that's an easy bet. Whether he can be the next Tony Blair, because he is that bit more centrist than Corbyn was, I think remains to be seen, and that's too far a thing off into the future to actually be able to predict at this point. So, yeah, I think he's found his feet. We can make more predictions about him now, but it's also, he's having issues at the moment with Brexit because they're kind of supporting the current government, but, that's the deal needs to go through. Like, I think most pragmatic people can see that we need to go with this deal because no deal is way worse and there's nothing we can do right now to fix it. So, unless there's some terrible rebellion against him over Brexit stuff, which I imagine there won't be, I think he's probably going to still be here next year. And yeah, I think it's going to be kind of more of the same until we get rid of coronavirus, and then we'll really be able to see if Keir Starmer can make a name for himself. And because how long was Tony Blair leader in the run-up to 1997? He was there for a few years before
3
that,
years.
right?
And he wasn't even it wasn't even the leader after 1992 because John Smith unfortunately passed away, and Tony Blair took the reins then.
It's a long way away, but I would not be surprised if Keir Starmer, unless something terrible happens, I don't mean terrible as in he dies. I mean terrible as in, if he has some really big scandal or something, I don't see why he wouldn't be the leader running into the next general election. So, obviously anything can happen in 4 years in politics. It's a long time. But at the moment, I think he's fairly secure as he is as Labour leader. And I think he will start to amp up his criticism of the current government. But I think that's contingent on us getting rid of coronavirus, because I think it seems clear to me that he's not so great at taking them to task on that on the whole. Like, he might be good in PMQs, but I think he doesn't really get headlines for saying, oh, we'd do it differently, because there's a lot of stuff that they've said, oh, we'd kind of do the same thing, but a bit more of a restriction, So I think that's a bit too wishy-washy to tell a good story. So next up, Lib Dems. So we said they'd struggled to find a new USP last year. I think I'm going to steal your prediction from last year. I don't think the Lib Dems have really made headlines this year, and I think they're going to struggle. I don't think until they have another manifesto and another election that they're going to be particularly relevant again, and at least not while coronavirus is going on, because they don't really have a say in how the country is run, because there's not enough of them.
I agree, which is why I'm going to kind of hijack this segment on the Lib Dems and talk about the real third party in the UK at the moment, which is the SNP, and their predictions for 2021. So I just think, Lib Dems are going to struggle, I think continue that struggle in 2021, but a political party that has the power to change things and shake things up in the UK, particularly in 2021, is the SNP for a variety of reasons. We've talked about it in previous podcasts, but the coronavirus has led to devolution having a far bigger role than we thought it would, or at least it's brought it into the headlines more. So the way the SNP in Scotland have dealt with coronavirus has been sort of put to the front, and even though they dealt with exams, probably messed it up the same way the UK did, they were far quicker to react and change that. Also, even though they've got a different tier system, and some would argue about the effectiveness of their coronavirus response, if in the end it turns out that they've had a more effective response than England, then again they come out on top slightly in that situation, and they gain a bit more political capital from it, and that increases the chance of the SNP winning big in elections in 2021 and maybe forcing another referendum on the cards. I think finally the other thing that could affect how powerful the SNP get is the effect of this deal that we've got with the EU. It's no secret that Boris Johnson has a problem when it comes to attracting voters in Scotland, and even though his talk is fairly unionist, I think amongst Scottish voters, Boris Johnson is basically a vote loser rather than a vote winner if you compared him to someone like Ruth Davidson, who used to be the Scottish Conservative leader up there. She was seen as largely popular and helped the Scottish Conservatives win big back in 2017 in that election, probably what saved Theresa May and kept her majority government. Now the Conservatives will struggle to make headway, and particularly if Britain starts to lose out in that deal and Scotland is seen to have absolutely no say on the direction of that deal or what happens, the argument will increasingly be made that, hey guys, weren't we better off when we were in the EU? Oh, and by the way, Scotland as a whole voted to stay in the EU. Why are we being forced to do things by a central government that doesn't listen to us? Maybe we should get some independence. And that added argument on top of the old independence argument that was floated back in 2015 may be enough to tip that over the edge. I feel it's unlikely that the Conservative government will allow another referendum, because it's contingent on the Conservatives allowing Scotland to have a referendum on that matter. But if Boris Johnson did, for whatever reason, agree, or political pressure in Scotland simply got too much that it couldn't be ignored anymore, then if that sort of support for the SNP goes up, then they continue to become a far more important power, a very important third party in British politics, and we could be looking at another exit from a union in the near future if that pressure begins to build. I don't think it'll happen in 2021, but I do think this will be a year where the importance of the SNP is only going to go up, and they're going to make more headlines rather than fade into obscurity, which like the Lib Dems have.
No, I think I will broadly agree with you in that. I mean, if you look at the SNP's numbers, back in the day, Labour and the Conservatives would fight over Scotland. There are a few Lib Dem seats. Nowadays, it's mostly SNP, and I would not be surprised if it goes even more SNP. So yeah, with their next election coming up in Holyrood in 2021, I know there's been a few things, like there was an SNP a member of Scottish Parliament member of Parliament actually, not member of Scottish Parliament, who came down during the restrictions and got in a lot of trouble and got kind of like the whip removed, I believe, was what happened to her. And then there's been a few other things. But in general, I think most people have felt in Scotland that the current SNP government has been doing really well, and so I would not be surprised if we see an uptick in SNP MSPs, which are members of Scottish Parliament. Obviously, the general election is a bit different, and that's a few years, that's 4 years away. But I would not be surprised if we see an increase in their numbers, unless they have, some more big scandals. But again, they seem to be surviving the scandals they have had in the last year pretty well. And it does look like, if you look at the polls for independence, they're again on the rise. We had a referendum back in 2014, and that's 6 years ago now. But since then, the numbers have been on the rise. I've spoken to Scottish friends living down in England, not people who are up in Scotland, who are still like, frankly, everything that's happened. And it seems to all stem from what's happened with Brexit, this swing, which is not surprising. I mean, coronavirus probably has had an effect as well, but it's pretty much the promise was stay as part of the union, and the union will stay as part of the EU. And then immediately we had the Brexit referendum. And I think it's going to take a long time to fix the impact that's had. I think there's going to be more SNP MSPs during the upcoming elections this year. And I think, as you say, they'll continue to be in the headlines. And it is true. Like, if you look at, I know we normally talk about the Lib Dems because we're based in England, but if you look at the numbers over the country, it's definitely Conservatives, Labour, SNP. So it will probably be more of a Scottish focus this year, I would imagine. We'll try to do our best on that. I do know some people living up in Scotland, so might have to reach out to some Scottish correspondents. But I will not be surprised if we have more SNP stories in the coming year. So our final topic is the US of A. Joe Biden will be inaugurated at the end of January, or nearly the end of January, on the 21st of January. What do you think Joe Biden, how is Joe Biden going to start off? I know we already have some ideas because he's been talking about his cabinet, he's been talking about his coronavirus response plans. Right now, Trump is still throwing spanners in the works.
Yeah, so I think that first 100 days, which is always seen as important by any president coming into power, what they do, I think a lot of his focus will be on COVID, making sure that relief effort goes ahead. And I think you'll see a big change on the messaging there. As you're aware, we've mentioned that Trump wasn't the best at handling it, and that I think he can be accused of sending out mixed messages, particularly when it comes to some of the basics like mask wearing and social distancing. The USA doesn't really have that same policy that the rest of the world seems to be following, and a lot of that does stem from its president conveying a certain mood to the nation. I think Biden and Kamala Harris's message will be far more kind of like, we'll follow the Dr. Fauci advice, and will be, no, you've got to wear masks, and that will be consistent with the entire Biden-Harris campaign, in which you hardly saw Joe Biden without a mask on, unless he was at a debate. Secondly, I think you'll see him start to undo a lot of the Trump work that was done by executive order. So the way that Trump governed was that because he lacked the control of the House in his later 2 years, a lot of his proclamations didn't have to go through both the House and Congress to get passed. He just governed by executive order, which is convenient because you can do that very quickly. However, it means that when the next government comes in, it's really easy for the next president to go, no, I don't agree with that, I'm cancelling it. So I think that there'll be a bit of tit for tat there, and Biden will just simply undo a lot of the Trump laws that came in. If Biden is able to do any more, that's entirely dependent on the results of the Senate election. There are 2 runoffs going ahead in Georgia, which I think, as we speak, are very close. I think it would be, my feeling is that it's unlikely that both of those will go for the Democrats. So we're likely to still have a Republican-controlled Congress, which will, of course, limit what Biden's able to do, and probably won't, he won't be able to enforce any wide sweeping health reforms if he doesn't have the control of all the houses of Congress. But I think we'll certainly see a change in sort of those executive orders coming out of the White House, and generally a change of tone. I think a lot of people are looking forward to a more quiet/boring White House, one that they don't have to be scared of what's going to be tweeted every day. I'm not going to say that, I think it's fair to say that Joe Biden will lead a much more normal presidency than the previous occupant of the White House. It'll be definitely interesting to see what happens on Inauguration Day. As we're aware, Trump has fought the results of this election tooth and nail. I don't think you will see him dragged out of the White House by Secret Service agents. I think that he will come to sense before then. But there may be a bigger question mark if Trump even attends the thing. He is the kind of guy, I think, who would, out of spite, not attend. And if he doesn't, that would be I think that would be a big deal. There's a lot of things that Donald Trump has done that have been unpresidential, but I think that would be one of the most unpresidential things that he's done, because that is going against every tradition in the book, and will really set him apart from every other president that has ever taken that office and had to give it up.
So my first prediction I want to make about Trump is that I don't think he's going to go easily. He's going to be... I think it's easy to say that he's going to keep making a fuss all the way up to the inauguration. And I think he probably will snub Biden at the inauguration. It'd be the opposite of what Obama did, where Obama, well, we're pretty certain Obama doesn't agree with Trump, but he did at least go to the inauguration as he should. I would not be surprised if Trump doesn't show and makes a scene of it, because that's very Trump. If he does turn up, it's because he's going to be making a scene in a different way. I don't know how he'd do it, but, I think that's very Trump on the whole. I think, as you say, Biden's going to be a much more normal president, and that coronavirus and this relief bill are going to be his first priorities. I don't think that's hard to see right now. As for his overall stuff he's going to do in his first year, I think, again, it's a bit like we've been saying about other things. It's going to depend how much coronavirus stays in the headlines. America is struggling as much as I think we are with a lot of things. I don't think they have the new variant, but they're also having a lot of problems, especially with, I think they have a slightly louder anti-vaccine, anti-mask brigade over there that they need to deal with. And as we saw from the election results, the country is fairly split down the middle at the moment. So I think it's easy to predict that he will be preaching things like unity. But the effect that will have, other than making the news cycle a bit more normal, I think it's going to take a lot longer for that to filter down. I don't think the problems that are underlying in American culture won't be fixed overnight, if that's what people are expecting. It's going to continue to be a problem, and I think it will at least be nice to have kind of normal level scandals again. I'm sure there will be scandals from a Democratic-run White House, but as you say, my feeling about the remaining race, I think I have to agree with you. I don't think the Democrats are going to win the Senate, which means he's going to have to be more conciliatory. He's going to have to work and reach over the aisle. I think a lot of the podcasts I've listened to that talk about American podcasts have noted that Biden did work with Mitch McConnell before. And so while Mitch McConnell right now is supporting Trump and kind of being brash about it, I think there will be places where they can compromise on stuff. But American politics has become very polarized, much like ours has. So how much compromise there can be, I don't know. And I think we're just going to, right now it's really hard because we haven't seen the first tests of this new administration with the news, whatever the setup of Congress ends up being. So I think that will really give us an idea of how the year will pan out for Biden. I think, at least from the news and stuff like that, there will be a kind of general sigh of relief, as there has been already with Trump gone, and things will return to kind of more normality. I think also the other thing Biden will be strong on, I think, is going out and reaching out to other countries and trying to restore those relationships that were maybe endangered a bit by Trump. Although I do get the feeling that the discussions with the UK may be a bit fraught, as we've discussed before, because, Boris has been very kind of... I know we now have a deal regarding Northern Ireland and how it's all going to work, but I believe Biden once shouted, "I'm Irish," at a BBC reporter when they asked him about Brexit stuff. So I definitely think there could be more of a tension there. We're not going to have the same special relationship we once had. And I definitely don't think Boris and Biden are the kind of people to see eye to eye either. So I think there will be more of a tension in the UK-US relationship with Biden, although at least it will be more understandable than it was with Trump. So I think those are my predictions there. And that's it, I suppose, for this predictions episode. As I said in the last episode, you can go to parliamentary.observer to find all the links to all the things. If you've enjoyed the last year and are looking forward to another year of unparliamentary language, go to patreon.com/TTSS, where you can throw a few dollars our way to support the website, the hosting costs, the software we use to edit the podcast, the microphones we have, all that jazz. And of course, the best thing you can do for the podcast is share it far and wide, tell your friends, tell us why you enjoy an episode, send them your favorite episode. And we hope to be with you through 2021, reporting on the news as we have been this year. And yeah, hopefully we won't be talking as much about coronavirus. Fingers crossed. I don't think there's anything else left for me to say other than it's good night from me.
And it's good night from him. Bye.
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 Bye. Bye. Join Mike and Tom for a nerdy conversation with a multitude of guests on Hat of Many Things.
Say hi, guys.
Hi, guys.
Hello.
I'm Mark, a librarian and professional wrestling ring announcer.
I cast League of Legends.
Soteros Philbrucato, best known for my work with White Wolf and Onyx Path Publishing on the World of Darkness.
Hi, I'm Jason Carl. I'm the producer of V5 at White Wolf.
Yeah, my name is Johanna Pettersson. I'm a Finnish game designer.